Hello again, it's Alan Macon, the local history tutor for Knowsley Face, with a continuing series of local history videos on the history of Knowsley and Liverpool through the ages. Today's short video will concentrate on Liverpool's 7 original streets. Those 7 original streets are still there today in Liverpool city centre. They comprise Water Street, Dale Street, Chapel Street, Bonk Street, Old Hall Street, Juggler Street, now called the High Street, and Castle Street, Liverpool's 7 original streets, which go back to the medieval period. So the short video will look at the history of these 7 streets, how they got their names, their geographical location through the centuries, look at some photographs of Victorian period, some artist impressions of the buildings that could be found in these streets, and how they changed over many centuries. So the first video, first handout we look at, entitled Liverpool 7 Original Streets, are 2 maps. The top map, the coloured map, is from 1650, the period of the English Civil War, Oliver Cromwell. The second map is a conjectural map, circa 1300, the century that brought us the Black Death. So first thing I'll do, I'll zoom into a map of Liverpool in 1650, which neatly illustrates Liverpool's 7 original streets. So you can see the so-called extended H and the original spellings of some of the names. Some of the street names have changed their spellings and names slightly over the centuries. There's the Pool of Liverpool, which gives us our name, also known as the Sea Lake, and the key with the date of 1650. So that's what Liverpool looked like around the year 1650. The pool was still there for another 50 years, but eventually it would disappear. The map underneath is a conjectural map, which basically means it's an educated guess what Liverpool may have looked like in the 1300s, the 14th century, with a population of probably no more than 1,000 people. But the 7 streets did exist. Say the name is slightly spelled differently, or even changed their names. So this is Liverpool, agricultural Liverpool, where the vast majority of the population were connected with agriculture of one sort or another. So there comes to Liverpool's first famous street, still there today, still a bustling street, is Water Street. So you can see from the photograph, I will zoom in, this is Water Street in 1895, the late Victorian period. The top of Water Street, just as it is today, is the famous Liverpool Town Hall. The original Town Hall was built in this particular Town Hall, 1754. And you can see its dome, famous dome, and the portico that sticks out on the corner of Water Street and Castle Street. So if we zoom out again, it goes on to talk about its history. So Water Street is one of the 7 original streets as laid out by King John, who gave us our charter, Liverpool's charter in 1207. For many years, the street was also known as Bonk Street, so named because of the so-called Lancashire dialect. Scousers are local dialect. Scouse has been around for less than 200 years. Obviously, it's got a big influence from Ireland, Lancashire itself, but certainly more than 200 years ago, people from Liverpool had a Lancashire accent, not a Scouse accent. So this so-called Bonk Street gets its name from the word Bonk, which was the Lancashire name for the bank. Bonk was bank of a river. The name changed to Bank Street and then later Water Street in the 16th century. The next famous Liverpool 7 streets is the famous Dale Street, still right at the heart of Liverpool today. Still a lovely city, some lovely street, lovely buildings in Dale Street. I'll just zoom into the picture first. So this is Dale Street around the year 1800. So just over 200 years ago, but the artist has captured it still, even though Liverpool then was an exploding population of about 80,000 people in 1800, it was still surrounded by countryside, and local people, local farmers still had the right to take their sheep, cattle right up into the city centre. So that's an idea of what Liverpool's Dale Street looked like in 1800. So the name Dale Street goes on to say, derives its name from the Saxon word, or the Saxon before 1066, for valley or dale, dell. The first reference to Dale Street in any documentation is from a medieval deed dated 1328. Plots of land, also known as a burgage, strips of land, a bit like just a strip of land, were awarded to townsfolk, local people, by the king's bailiff at a rent. It was rented out, and obviously some of their profits went back to the king. So this burgage is a bit like a large strip of land, or a bit like a modern day allotment. The strips of land usually comprised a dwelling at the front and an area for domestic cultivation towards the rear. Over the years, or over the centuries, certainly, it says, however, some of the plots began to be used for commercial purposes. Certainly when the docks grew, people wanted shops, people wanted bigger houses, so that developed. Then we come to the next street, one Liverpool's 7th original street, is Chapel Street. So there's Chapel Street here, illustration, artist illustration, looking towards the waterfront, what was known as George's Dock, which is now the pier head, the Three Graces, and that's the famous St Nicholas Church, still there today. So we zoom out again. So Chapel Street takes its name from the medieval chapel of St Mary del Quay, which is basically the forerunner of the modern, or relatively modern, St Nicholas Church of the pier head, the Sailors' Church. There's been a church on this site from at least 1256, according to the records, and in the 18th century it became home of Liverpool's rich merchant classes, particularly as the profits to be made from the docks. The street was interspersed with pubs, hotels and business premises, so it was quite a prosperous part of Liverpool. The street was widened in the 19th century because of the traffic, and its original buildings were demolished. So that's a lovely artist illustration of what Chapel Street looked like in the year around 1800. The next street was still there today, the famous Bonk Street. A simple timber tithe. The word tithe is corrupting the word tenth. It was a Saxon agricultural tax. So the name Tithe Barn is a relatively common street name in Britain. So a simple timber tithe, or a barn, tithe barn. This is Tithe Barn, the original Tithe Barn. Give its name to Tithe Barn Street. There's that building there. Goes on to say, it was erected on this street in the early 16th century as a place where locals would pay local agricultural taxes to. Originally, the Walton Church, which was very powerful and had a large area, and it took in the local taxes or tithes, and then it was passed on to Lord Molyneux, became the Earls of Sefton, until recently lived at Croxteth Hall. By the 19th century, the street was in close proximity to the railway station, which encouraged the establishment of hotels and public houses within, such as the Lion Tavern, the Stag Vault and the United Powers, opening to take advantage of the constant flow of potential customers. Then we move on to Old Hall Street, right in the heart of Liverpool. Old Hall was formerly known as Whiteacre Street on old documents and old maps. The mansion house and seat of the Moores family was originally called Moore Hall, but they moved to Kirkdale, by Kirkdale Station. They built a huge house by Kirkdale Station, long since demolished. When they moved to Bank Hall in Kirkdale by the station, the family referred to, but before I move on, I just want to show you the Cotton Exchange. Arguably the most famous building in Old Hall Street is Liverpool Cotton Exchange, built in 1906. This is the original facade. This was knocked down in the 1960s. So this is a view probably from about 1910 of Old Hall Street. Then we come to the next 6th street. This was known as the, as I've just continued on, so the family referred to Moore Hall, the Moore family, as the Old Hall. Its most famous building, as I just said, was the 1906 Cotton Exchange. Then we come to Juggler Street, or the High Street, right next to Liverpool Town Hall. One of the original 7 streets, formerly Juggler Street, different spelling, site of weekly market, annual fairs. Here, its southern end was marked by the High Cross. So that's the High Street, or Juggler Street. Lastly, I'd like to look at Castle Street, which I mentioned in a previous video. So not surprisingly, Castle Street takes its name from the medieval castle built in 1235, demolished in around in the 1720s and totally in ruins. So that's why, not surprisingly, we get Castle Street. Lastly, as usual, I'd just like to finish off by saying please leave any comments you wish. Please stay tuned to Knowsley Face and Knowsley Recovery websites for more tips on mental health and well-being. Thank you.